If you want the biggest plants from your next harvest, does container size matter? And should you be up potting? That's what we're going to be talking about on today's show. But before we do, let's shout out to today's sponsor, Real Growers Grow Dots, the absolute fastest and easiest way to feed your plants. You mix grow dots in once at the beginning of your grow, and they feed all the way to harvest. Go check them out over at realgrowers.com. And now let's talk a little pot size, Heisey. You ready?
Yeah, so I know that a lot of people advocate for up potting, and this is an objection that we've run into with grow dots.
Sure.
Is you mix them in once at the beginning, and they feed all the way to harvest, so that kind of takes away the ability to up pot, doesn't it?
The idea with up potting is you want to keep a plant from getting root bound. If you're growing a tree or something like that, you want to grow a dense root system and then expand it out a little bit at a time. You know, a couple inches at a time, goes from a 1 to a 3 to a 5 or a 7. And you can keep a plant from getting root bound for a long time that way. I'm not growing my plants for a long time. I'm trying to grow a root mass that's appropriate for the amount of time that I'm vegging. So that's what determines my container size.
Okay, cool. And so you were talking about trees. I think about like tomato plants too.
Sure.
Where I kind of do want them to do a little bit of up potting so that when it comes to where I'm going to transplant it, I want that big, bulky root system. It's not so important though with cannabis because I'm not taking them from the garden center and putting them in my garden at home. I'm just moving them around in my grow.
Yeah, well, I mean, at that garden center, it started in a little, a seedling and then a solo cup and then expanded out from there till it got to the garden center where you're going to bring it home and then plant it. Mm-hmm. That's not the case for us. I'm growing this seedling or this clone, and right when it's in the solo cup is when I'm transplanting it. I know that I'm not going to veg for a super long time, so I got to figure out how long it will take to fill whatever container I'm going to put it in. So it really has to do with how long I'm going to veg my plant, what the ultimate size I want to grow my plant to.
Okay, yeah, and I've seen you go straight from the solo cup right into your final container.
Yeah, in those 4-gallon real bucket inserts, absolutely. And so I just have to veg for the appropriate amount of time. I wouldn't want to take those in 10 days in or a week in from veg, going in and flowering those up. If I was going to do that, I would do it in maybe 1-gallon container, something like that, maybe a 2-gallon container.
Okay, so we're going straight from our solo cup into our final container. That's the way that you do it. It seems pretty safe. I haven't seen you have like disastrous results from doing it that way.
No, I mean, it's easy. Like I said, it does depend on the time you're going to veg. And by the way, I don't know if this is out of context or not, but autoflowers, you definitely do not want to transplant in autoflowers. Autoflowers, they go right into their finishing container. That's an exception to the rule.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about how to pick what size my final container should be.
Sure.
You said 4 gallons is what you usually go for, 3 to 4 gallons. I've seen people do 10 gallons, especially if they're growing outdoors.
Sure.
So let's talk about how do I pick what my final container should be.
Right.
You mentioned veg. Why does veg matter when it comes to my container size?
Well, I mean, the size of the plant you're going to get, what happens above the ground has to happen. There's action that happens below the ground. So if you're trying to grow a 4-foot plant with a 1-gallon container, you're going to be exhausting the nutrient holding capacity of the root zone of that soil. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have to be constantly providing more nutrient in there. They do it. There's guys that water 6, 7, 8 times a day. They call it crop steering. It's cyclical irrigation. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of work, though.
Okay, and I'm thinking generally the bigger the plant I'm shooting for, the more time I'm going to have to let it veg to get there, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also like to think of, I don't know if there's real science behind this or not, but from my growing experience, the canopy kind of mimics the size of the container below. So if you have just a really small container, you'll normally get kind of a Christmas tree kind of canopy. If you have a really big fat container, you'll get just a wider canopy. It's not an exact rule. It does depend on strain or whatnot, but
my Freemason friends say as above, so below, but we're going to jump past that into the next one. How much space is in your grow? Kind of impacts the size that you're going to go for container size.
Absolutely. And did we talk about plant count yet? Because both those things really come together. If you can only grow 4 plants, then you want to make sure, you allocate the right amount of space to it. But if you're going to grow 4 plants, man, you might want to grow a 7 or a 10-gallon container, something really big. The more that there's a sweet spot in it, because the bigger the container, the less often you have to water it. But if you get too big of a container and it just stays waterlogged all the time, then you got a good chance of root rot. And so there really is a sweet spot, and it depends on the plant size.
Okay. And you mentioned plant count. Why would that matter to people?
If you only have a 4 plant count, say, or something really low, you're going to want to grow big, giant plants, I would imagine.
That would be like somebody who's in a state where they're only legally allowed to grow.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you just have 1 2x4 tent, you probably want to grow some decent sized plants in there. Okay. If you're allowed 18 or 30 plants, and you can have in your little tent, you can have 6 1-gallon plants. Don't forget, each time that you grow a plant big in a big container, there's a lot of time that you have to veg that plant. You have to, a month or so. If you're growing a really big plant, you might veg it for 6 weeks. That is all sorts of time for things to happen to it. I'd rather take that young plant right after a month or so. You flower it up, and then you keep on replacing them. But to do that, you better have some plants, and you better have some plants being cloned and some plants in veg, and it's a cyclical kind of thing. It's a bit different than just growing a couple plants in a tent.
Okay, so there's a lot of reasons why plant size or plant count might matter. Let's talk about strains particularly.
Sure.
How does the strain type affect what size of container you should be growing in?
There are a couple plants that I like to just keep in small containers. I like to flower them up when they're small. They will usually just grow one giant central bud in the center, and that's what I'm after. There are other strains that grow really leggy. I've got an Emergency in there that grows really leggy and a bunch of popcorn all over the place. I'm not going to get much if I keep that in a 1 or a 2-gallon container. So something like that grows great for me in a 4 or 5-gallon container. Grows absolutely great.
Okay. And indoor versus outdoor. We didn't have this in the notes, but I have noticed outdoor growers like bigger, like 7 to 10-gallon containers, maybe 20 gallons.
Maybe 100.
Holy cow.
Yeah, they have huge. Think about, first of all, we talked about it mimicking below or mimicking above what is below, that container size below. So think about, you get these outdoor plants, somebody standing next to them and it dwarfs them. They're huge. So they require a lot of water, a lot of nutrient. I mean, how often are you going to get? You're not going to go out 4 times a day or 6 times a day and water your outdoor plant, and you probably don't have a reservoir set up for it. You're probably dragging, like me, 5 gallons of water out there every time. So
yeah, a lot of water, a lot of nutrient, and a lot of room for the roots to expand.
Sure, sure.
Okay, cool. All right, so your preference for your grow style, explain what size containers you love to use and why.
I'm using real buckets. I use a 4-gallon insert, or right around the 4-gallon insert. And because I only veg for maybe a month, 4 or 5 weeks, I'm able to go from a solo cup. I'll put my grow dots in right when I go from the solo cup. I got 4 weeks of really aggressive, strong veg. When I pull the plants out after 4 weeks, I've got white fuzzy roots growing out the bottom of that. That's what you want. Now you've got to develop a root system that's able to grow those big fruits, those big flowers.
Okay, so you like about a 3.5-4-gallon container.
Yep, 4-gallon container and about a 4-week veg. If you're going to go bigger, you're going to need a bigger, longer veg. You're going to need a bigger container. The longer I veg, the more I think there's potential problems for the plant. I want these things in their adolescence, man, in their strong youth stage where they're just growing like crazy. They're eating like crazy. They're growing like crazy, putting on muscles.
Nice. All right, cool.
But what about you? What size container do you grow in? Do you like to up pot? Come on, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, please smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, and check out the other couple videos YouTube's recommending. I hope you like them.